Hi, this is Page Open on the Southbridge Street Live series of programs, and I'm Charles Alexander. I'm a poet and bookmaker, and this program is all about poetry and the various vehicles in which it comes to you, books being just one of those vehicles. Today I have a guest, Saba Sayed Razvi, who is a colleague of mine at the University of Houston, Victoria, where she is a poet, teacher of creative writing, a scholar of poetry and of science and poetry, and it's just great to have you with me today, Saba.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here. This is really fun.
I know a lot of poets, their first publication is in chapbooks if it's not in journals, and I know I've had chapbooks of my work published. Saba's had chapbooks of her work published. A lot of people don't know what that is. Saba, what is a chapbook to you?
That is a really good question. And, I think it's one that's changing right now, so it's a valuable question to consider. But I would define a chapbook as any small collection of works that's particularly curated, that is written by one author, and that's under about 48 pages. Although I think that varies. I think we start to see people thinking of 30 pages as a chapbook, and then some people think anything under 45 is a chapbook. But, I think between 45 and 60 is that sort of awkward in-between space. But, 45 and below is a chapbook, and, 60 and above is a book, right?
Yeah, I generally think of it as 40 pages or less. And I always think of even pages because every page has two sides.
Right,
So 45 would throw me. I'm like, how can you have a 45-page book? But chapbooks are sewn. Here, I don't know, it's a hard one to see, but there's a thread on the spine of this, and they are sewn, or they are stapled. Here's a chapbook from the 1960s, stapled.
Nice.
While many people choose to produce chapbooks because they're fairly easy to produce and fairly inexpensive to produce, they can become quite valuable. I mean, this one I just held up by Edward Dorn is now selling for anywhere between $50 and $100, or if it's signed by him, $250.
Came across a copy of Howl, which was first released as a chapbook, and I was so excited because Howl, the thing was selling for $150, which was a steal at the time. But I think they really do escalate in value, which is so interesting.
Yes. And Howl, if you don't know it, is one of the classic American poetry books from the 1950s by Allen Ginsberg. And if you don't know it, go find it, and it will blow your mind, as it has blown many minds through the decades since. One thing that I also think about a chapbook is it's a book that does not have a spine. A spine in a book is usually has author and title. I didn't even bring a book out here with a spine, but chapbooks generally do not have one. So, so then there's something like this, which is a gathering of a few groups of pieces of paper. There's an accordion spine. Is this a chapbook? I'd probably say, on the one hand, I'd probably say, no, not really to me. On the other hand, I'd say, if you want to call it a chapbook, that's fine with me. I don't care, because it's certainly less than 40 pages. It is not a one-author gathering. This was produced in a class of people using both writing and visual
that's lovely.
pieces to make this book. So maybe it wouldn't qualify. Okay, fine. That's the other thing I don't...
I'd probably call that like an anthology, because it's got multiple people, but that's where I draw the line. I think that's different.
Sometimes I feel like it's funny how closely defined people want to make things.
Right.
Like there are also miniature books in literature, and to some people, if a book is more than 2.5 inches tall, even if it's 2 3/4 inches tall, it cannot be a miniature book. And I think some people maybe feel that way about chapbooks, and I'm not that careful about it. It's often, as I said, the way somebody might get into a first book would be a chapbook, a first, second, third book too, maybe. But it's also a place sometimes that a particular group of work that works really well together can stand out and shine, whereas in a book of 100 pages or something, it may be a small part of that book that would get a little bit lost.
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think the notion of taking a smaller collection and curating it in a very particular way amplifies certain voices. It really highlights certain things, and it works in a way that larger collections or fuller books just don't work. It's almost like putting a spotlight on something, or making a nice display for certain kinds of things. But that aspect of curating materials is really important in this world. Everyone seems to like BuzzFeed listicles and these little pieces of clickbait that make you find information by moving one at a time. And the notion of taking your time through a project but doing it artfully is something that I think we can find in chapbooks. And I've bought chapbooks primarily because of their focus on maybe a theme, or their way of looking at a smaller collection or arrangement of things. It's the difference between looking at maybe a constellation versus an entire solar system or something, right?
One thing I think, I like the combination, even in the chapbooks I have out here on this table, of artful and not so artful.
Sure.
Sometimes something just thrown together pretty quickly, a Xerox cover, a few
Right.
pages, although I do think that's
I
actually
think
is
that's
kind of
lovely.
artful.
Yeah, and it's got all the excitement of like a zine or
Mhm.
something, Yeah.
But then also something that combines actually letterpress printing, a painting by Cynthia Miller, who works here in the studio with me.
There's another
But
one of
then the
hers.
inside is relatively inexpensively produced, and
Mhm.
it's sewn. This is kind of an in-between book to me,
Sure.
between something like this, which is technically under 40 pages and
Right.
and a single work, yet this gets into the realm of artist book.
I would call that an art book, just weirdly because of the size.
The
I know
size,
that's strange,
I know.
but I'm not one of those purists who wants a miniature book to be exactly 2.5. But I would look at something that large and call it an artist book. And seeing all these parts here too, I mean, there's something about this that is different. There are all these different layers and
It's collaged, it
yeah,
got pasted in
yeah.
there. And I do find, though, that people who make chapbooks sometimes do get involved into the act of making. And
Yeah.
sometimes those people go on to make artist books. And the series by Don Pendergast and Paul Klinger
Oh, those are so beautiful.
in
Really
Houston, Texas, she started out just gathering fabric and stapling things together, and then ended up making these beautiful prints on fabric with simple insides, but I think these are real works of art. This is a good example too of something for an occasion. It's a
Yes,
gathering. This is
yes.
actually epithalamium. You know what an epithalamium is?
Sure. They're poems for weddings.
Poem for the Wedding, and it is Epithalamium, an ode to the unlikely marriage of Paul Klinger and Don Pendergast.
Oh, that's amazing.
Two people who I've known since they were in graduate school together, and I don't find it at all unlikely marriage, but and yet all marriages
This
are
is
unlikely.
red little leaves, right? That's their
little red
little
leaves.
red leaves. There
And
we
they
go.
call them textile editions because
Right.
of the fabric
And they have these
aspect of them.
beautiful blank books too. And I remember they came here to give a reading some time ago. It was one of the first Downtown Art Series events. And they had these beautiful things that seem like a cross between an art book and a chapbook, including these, and one about crocodiles or alligators, I think it was. And there's just something stunning about the way in which the book object works with the thematic content,
Yes.
which is just, it's so delightful. You just want to hold it and read it and share it and delight in it and savor it in a way that, poetry demands to be adored, right?
Let's look inside a couple of
Yeah.
these books. I
Let's.
I was going to ask you to read something from one of yours.
Sure.
But if I may, I'd like to start with something else
Yeah.
to honor a member of our extended community, Martha Reed, who
Yeah.
passed away yesterday morning. And much of her work is in chapbooks, although she has several full-length books too. And she was in Syracuse, New York, and I think we both became friends with her at different conferences, occasions, and through the internet, the ethernet,
Right.
as people do.
The
She was
the
a
Facebook
leader,
feeds
I
are all
think, in
Talking about it right now.
what has come to be called the eco-poetics movement.
Yeah.
And I thought, since this program is called Page Open, I thought we'd open some pages of these chapbooks.
Sounds like a good idea.
And I wanted to start with Martha Reed, who is a friend, a good poet, another publisher as well, also a teacher of this art, and she passed away yesterday morning, and we both knew her, and many loved her. She's also, I think of her as one of the leaders of the eco-poetics movement, with a grave concern for so-called Anthropocene, or what this era where man is the most dominant force for change on the planet has done. So this, I'm opening up in the middle of the book. I'm going to read a few pages. Climate change and associated impacts will continue for centuries, even if anthropogenic emissions, greenhouse gases, cease. Risk of abrupt or irreversible changes increases as magnitude of warming increases. Without additional efforts beyond those in place today, warming and 21st century high to very high risk, severe, widespread, irreversible global impacts, high confidence. Science works, bitches. That was Martha Reed from her chapbook, Data Primer. And
Can we show those pages real quick?
Sure.
Because they're worth looking at. They're
yes,
just
the
so
pages are
beautiful.
visual,
right?
they're laid out. There's one page where it talks about the glacier shrinking, where the type shrinks on the page. They're just lovely.
And there's always, in chapbooks, I've noticed there's always an attention to how the words come across, how they look.
Mhm.
It's that way in poetry, but it's worth examining and just pausing to look at for a second.
I like pages, not everyone does, but I like pages that give me a lot of space. Because it's like you're walking into a room or into a field, and there's the things in it that define that field.
Yeah.
And you get to think about that.
I like that the pages field, yeah.
We also lost another friend a few days ago, Spencer Selby, who died in Ames, Iowa, but lived most of his life in the San Francisco area. And he actually kept a list for decades. Everybody just called it Spencer's List of experimental magazines and presses. And that was something you could go to say, who else is doing this work now? Where can I find it? And so this is from a chapbook by Spencer called Barricade, and it's published by Paradigm Press, which was in Providence. And this is just one page from it. Switching points blur the outline from time, place, circumstance. Even though the waves themselves may minimize a surplus and so afford luxury we do not know enough about. Some common object, right in the stiffness of age. The more encouraging reason taken by a few units marked off to cover apparent behavior. Constant blot against a background, shouted abuse and unforgiving, clanked like armor, forward, upright, medium, normally associated with the first extremity for groups recorded below. So that's a little bit of two authors. That's another thing about chapbooks, because they're relatively easy to produce and lots of people do them. They've been a point of gathering community.
Mm-hmm.
There's even one great chapbook project, you probably know the Ducey Collective,
Yes.
which they
Oh, they're
invite
wonderful.
people to create their own chapbooks in editions of large enough number so that everyone that participates in the project gets one of those chapbooks. So,
Right.
so they almost just in that act create friendships, create collaborations, create community.
And a sense of celebration for poetry and for the work that's done too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could you read something from one of your chapbooks?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, please.
But I wanted to say, chapbooks are also really, they're something I use in my poetry classes as well. And so when I teach a workshop, I actually ask my students to create a chapbook as their portfolio final project of all the poems they've written in that semester, and enough copies for everyone to go around and whoever else they want to give them to. And then we do a little reading or a little, just a celebration in that way. And it's the most wonderful thing, because you start to see them, see their work as something more than just practice.
And I do the same thing, but for design students.
Yeah.
So that they think about the outside, they think about the inside, they think about individual picture planes
Mhm.
with text and or image, and they think about sequence of multiple picture planes, which
Yes.
is in some ways a definition of book. A book is a sequence of multiple picture planes.
Sure.
And it sounds easy, it's not so easy when
No.
they've never done one before, but.
But there's
Yes.
this wonderful way of honoring the work and the effort and the joy that comes from creating it and just seeing it come through into the world. You know, and full-length books take so long to submit and send out and publish, and they become these big untouchable beasts. But there's something about this that's accessible and that says, you know, you can still share what you love with the world.
Right.
Even if it's not it's so big that it needs to be hardbound with leather and you know things of that nature. This is Limerence and Lux. This is from Charles's press, from Jack's press, and Cynthia Miller did this beautiful, beautiful art. And I if you've never seen it, it's you gotta check it out. It's beautiful, and it has an interesting story about the type, which maybe you'll tell at some point. Mystery type, right?
It is mystery time. We don't know what it is.
So I kind of love that. I think it's delightful. And these are little poems that are, I don't know, they're nightmares or they're love shadows. I mean, they're love poems, but they're kind of creepy. So that's kind of what I write. This is Dream with astrolabe and compass. I filled my house with bird cages, antique, and lamps, tall, iron, and bits of bamboo assembled into sculptures for the seating of some light. Drawing closed all the shutters, I waited for a luminescence that did not come. I wrapped my darkness in a shroud and shrouded the nascent suns, one by ones, and longed for the moon to emerge from the vetiver of dreams, filled with stones and green men and rockets, in path fixed, and the sense that light could come from any of those distant radiant points, or from inside that darkness. I shuddered and waited until the darkness yielded night, constellations of something distant enough and extinct enough and dead enough to tolerate. There were Zubin el-Ganubi, there the Eagle's Head supernova, there Zubin Escamali, there the Heart's Nebula, a safe distance away in its crimson, its nostalgia, far enough away to break open 1,001 pinpricks of light, and land as nothing but dust, coating the fabrics, filling my house, some direction for the needle unaccustomed to aligning. And it looks like this, so it's a big rock in a field, right? So.
You have redefined for me 1,000 points of light to 1,000 pinpricks of light.
Thank you.
I will remember yours. And I was going to read from one of mine. I had one of those books from Little Red Leaves Textile Editions. This also has a cover with a detail of a painting by Cynthia Miller called Vessels. And this is from a work called Some Sentences Look for Some Periods. And it's much more memoiristic than most of my work, although it also interrupts that all over the place too. And this later, or I recognize sometime this was also part of my work, Pushing Water, which is ongoing, but these stand alone. One, I tell myself that nothing can be perfect. I tell myself in nothing words that nothing words that can be perfect. I tell myself nothing words. I tell myself words. Once a butterfly, then a burning hand, a memory of a burning hand. Everyone left me at 8 years old, so I left too, walking a road out of the city toward a lake, step 1 and 2. A piano next to the mirror. My sister has beautiful red hair and she plays piano. Notes are sometimes red. Near the piano, I tell my mother's hard-drinking friend to leave the house. After Tennyson, I always hear the bells, the beauty of a Liberty Bell. To cry with the beast, truly the only human present. Also lost in Japan, wandering where water goes. The truck knocks me down and perhaps out. A baseball hits my head, and I remember waking up to the attention of worried faces. I tell them that nothing can be perfect. If my father lies full fathom 5, will I see him again? He tends the fire that heats the meat that fills the belly. Until he dies, I never once think of my mother as fragile, always distant, sometimes pretending not to hear me. I tell her nothing words. Later, when I am married, I love everything about familiar flesh. I study books while she learns to help victims. I tell words. In court, we all suffer, win or lose. I'm the only one to choose Oakland to win the Super Bowl, and I win a pot of money while all the young attorneys scowl and go home with their suits on. My eyes feel like they are freezing. Maurice Béjart dances the meaning of communal liberation, the emergence of the firebird among us. Early on, I understand that I like difficult music. Zounds. This is not a nothing word. Strum the chords, at least in the evening. I'll stop there. The work goes on, but I hope you have gathered some sense of what a chapbook might be, but also some sense of we could never touch all the things that a chapbook might be any more than we could touch all the things that a book might be. This has been Page Open.